Thank you, Member. Member for North Vancouver Lonsdale.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to begin my remarks by reading a press release issued by a very popular U.S. Senator in 2015. It was Senator Bernie Sanders. It reads, in part, decrying the influence of big money in American politics, U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders on Sunday said he will introduce legislation to provide public funding of elections. We're going to introduce legislation which will allow people to run for office without having to beg money from the wealthy and the powerful, Sanders said. He called the current campaign finance system a sad state of affairs. Public funding, he added, would level the political playing field and make elections more competitive. It also would let candidates spend more time meeting voters and discussing issues and less time raising campaign funds. That's called democracy, and I am going to do everything I can to bring that about, Sanders said. Public funding of campaigns would counteract the disastrous Supreme Court ruling in a case known as Citizens United. That 2010 case and others which followed in its wake have gutted decades-old limits on campaign funding and paved the way for millionaires and billionaires to spend unlimited sums to influence election outcomes. We must overturn that decision before it's too late, Sanders told the crowd here. We are increasingly living in an oligarchy where big money is buying politicians. He cited former President Jimmy Carter's concerns about how the Citizens United ruling resulting in unlimited political bribery. The senator compared politicians to NASCAR drivers, with their sponsors' logos emblazoned on their uniforms. He imagined a politician with a sign saying, "I am sponsored by the Koch brothers," or "I am sponsored by Big Oil." It's a really sad state of affairs, said Sanders. So, of course, Senator Sanders was speaking about big money down in the States, but I do believe there are quite a few parallels here. Madam Speaker, this week, the new government tabled what will be a historic bill for the future of BC by putting an end to what was called the Wild West of Canadian political financing once and for all. The importance of this bill cannot be understated, but one element of this complex and thorough legislation has been dominating the conversation: the transitional per-vote allowance and partial expense reimbursements. I think that it is extremely unfortunate that that part of the bill is being used to overshadow how incredibly democratic the entire proposal actually is, and that includes the transitional per-vote allowance. Quoting Douglas Todd in his column on September 23rd, I believe it was in the Vancouver Sun, Douglas said, "Most democracies consider it fair, if not essential, to fight potential corruption by having the public bear some of the cost of political campaigns. Otherwise, backroom oligarchs, the companies, the unions, and individuals with deep pockets to fund political parties can and do infiltrate the legislative process to shift it to their own ends." As most of you likely already know, at this current moment in time, there are no limits on union, corporate, or even foreign donations. That means, hypothetically, it would be legal, as an example, for a corporation with absolutely no ties or interest in the welfare of BC's public to donate enough money for a political party to win an election or more. Such influence can significantly distort how public policy is developed, and with that, public spending. It is an incredibly serious issue that has grave consequences on democracy, as well as our tax dollars. BC has an annual operating budget of approximately $50 billion a year, and there are billions more to be spent on capital projects. One must wonder how millions of dollars of donations from developers of oil and gas companies, how that might influence how governments spend those dollars, or the decisions that they make and what those decisions are worth. The new system bans corporate, union, and out-of-province donations, while restricting donation limits for individuals within the province to a total of $1,200 per year to any given party and their candidates. It also includes many other measures to close loopholes and really tighten up the system. These include public reporting on the types of fundraisers that cabinet ministers and parliamentary secretaries are attending. Once this legislation is passed, it will make BC one of the strictest electoral financing jurisdictions in Canada. We will have the second lowest donation limit in the entire country, and it will take $65 million out of the election cycle. This piece of legislation is very thorough, and many details were fleshed out in the process of developing it in order to ensure loopholes are closed and to encourage buy-in from other parties so that this legislation to ban corporate and union donations can finally pass after so many attempts by the BC NDP in 16 years as opposition when the bills were continuously stopped by the previous government. Under this proposed legislation, there are two forms of public financial involvement. The first is a temporary transitional allowance of the following values, ending with a proposed ending in 2022. The amounts are as follows. In 2018, $2.50 for every vote a party will receive. In 2019, a party will receive $2.25 for every vote they have received. In 2020, that amount goes down to $2 per vote. In 2021, it goes down to $1.75, and in 2022, it's another $1.75. In 2023, that per vote transitional allowance goes to nothing. The member for Peace River South had mentioned that a person's per vote allowance was going to parties that they did not support. I believe that the member should perhaps review the legislation again, because it is very clear that the per vote allowance is only granted to a party that receives that number of votes. So, with the a temporary transitional allowance and a personal donation limit of $1,200 per party and its candidates, this new legislation will make BC the province with the lowest personal contribution limits without a permanent public subsidy model. Quebec does have a contribution limit of $100, which is lower, but they also provide a party allowance to every party based on the total number of all eligible voters in the province, as opposed to a party's real vote share. The majority of other provinces also include some kind of public funding model in their electoral financing. The second form of public financial involvement in this legislation is the election expense reimbursement, which I believe will encourage new parties to join the fold by helping smaller, less established parties gain a foothold. Because of our hopes for proportional representation in future elections, I am optimistic that many new parties will be able to join the race and that this will have a democratizing effect on this province. These new parties would not benefit from the temporary per vote allowance, thus the after-election reimbursements. The reimbursements would only be allowed on certain expenses that were actually paid for, and the parties and candidates must receive at least 10% of the vote to qualify. Let me be absolutely clear, however. Even more important and more critical than talking about the costs of these allowances and reimbursements is talking about the cost of staying with the current system, where public money is already used to subsidize the political agendas of the very wealthy. The costs of a distortive legislative and public spending agenda are enormous, both in real dollars and in real lives. There are many stories written by investigative journalists that suggest political donations may have resulted in favoritism in regards to billions of dollars of public spending. These are dollars that could have been helping us end poverty, support our seniors, keep housing affordable, and more. The fact of the matter is, taxpayers already pay for election spending, partly through the millions of dollars that go to pay for tax credits and deductions, but most of all, through the loss of control over the legislative priorities of the people that they elect. There are so many examples to ponder. Did the previous BC Liberal government gut the province's climate action plan because of $3.6 million in donations that the party received from the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers? Did the previous government's hands-off approach to the housing market have anything to do with the millions that they receive from developers and contractors year after year? Did the grizzly bear trophy hunt go on for so long under the previous government because of the donations the BC Liberal Party received from American grizzly bear hunters? Did tax breaks consistently go to benefit the richest people in our province because those are the individuals who can donate the most to the BC Liberals? We may never know if big money influenced those decisions. And the fact that we even have to ask these questions is in itself absolutely unconscionable for modern-day democracy. As someone who did not originally come from politics prior to entering this year's election, I cannot express to you how relieved I am that this change is being made so that my community might be confident that they will be able to have their needs considered as voters before a donor's personal profits. I am so relieved that our democracy might soon be able to work for the many and not the few at the top. This is an incredibly historic move for BC, and it comes after 16 years of a government that did everything in their power to keep BC's democracy in the dark ages. For that reason, for those reasons, and for more reasons like that, I will be supporting this bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.